That worked.
You're surprised, weren't you? For those of you who don't know, I'm Ted Landsmark, and I'm president here at the Boston Architectural College. I'm delighted to see all of you here this evening. We're particularly delighted to have such a large group of students present for tonight's lecture. This is our annual Arcangelo Cascieri lecture in the humanities. For many years, this was really the only lecture that we did during the year because of our academic schedule. And now I have to thank all the students and Atelier for the work that you've done to expand our lecture series. This remains a premier lecture. For many years, this lecture was coordinated by our past board member and chair, Bernie Goba, who is seated in the third row. And Bernie, if you would just wave so we can acknowledge the fact that your work over these years has laid a foundation for tonight's lecture, and so we thank you for both carrying forward with the lecture series and also for generating the funding that supports this particular lecture. Our speaker tonight is someone whom I met through work that I do with a group known as the Design Futures Council. They're the group that, among other things, ranks various design schools around the country and does a lot of background work. And we were holding a meeting in New York, and we were informed that we had an opportunity four of us had the opportunity to go over to the Skid Row and Merrill offices where we would meet someone who would take us to the top of the then still emerging Freedom Tower on the former World Trade site in downtown Manhattan. And we went over, and it was a rainy day, and it was actually a few days before they were about to hoist the tower, a spire to the top of the building, and there was still a lot of controversy around whether that particular spire on top was really a justifiable reason for calling that building the tallest building. But our speaker was the person we met on the site, and she took us up in the elevator. We got up, I think, as far as the 80th floor or so, and we were surrounded by clouds, and it wasn't possible to really see anything beyond that, and so we didn't go any higher than that. But what impressed me, apart from the fact that she was overseeing what, from my perspective, is almost certainly the most complicated construction project that is going on not only in New York, but really in the country. It's being built over subway lines and in a very sacred spot, and it's a very tall building, and it's in a very tough, compact area. What really impressed me was the way those tough New York construction workers revered the way she walked around that site. The person you're about to hear from is an extraordinarily powerful and accomplished architect. And saying that, all I can do is thank her for coming to speak with us tonight. I'm deeply honored to be able to introduce Nicole Dosso.
Thank you. Thank you. New York City, the Big Apple, center of the universe, melting pot. These are some of the iconic phrases used to describe the city of New York, my hometown. With an estimated population of over 8.3 million, New York City is the most densely populated city in the United States. This equates to approximately 27,000 people per square mile. In fact, about 1 in every 38 people living in the United States resides in New York City. In preparation of this speech, I solicited random individuals and inquired what comes to mind when thinking of New York City. Some of the responses: Statue of Liberty, Times Square, lights of Broadway, restaurants, eclectic neighborhoods, iconic skyscrapers, and a forever evolving skyline. Over the years, I have been asked to discuss One World Trade Center in the context of innovation. I will admit in the past as being hesitant to comment. Surprisingly, I myself questioned what is innovative about this project. Oxford Dictionary defines innovation as a new method, idea, product. If you ask the media, you will likely hear it took too long. It has a staggering cost set at $3.8 billion and is possibly one of the most debatable structures in the world. One World Trade Center, a publicly owned commercial building, has 2.6 million square feet of Class A office space, 3 levels of observation deck, a broadcast antenna facility, approximately 55,000 square feet of retail, and has direct access to the World Trade Center transportation hub, which will eventually connect to 11 subway lines and the Port Authority Path rail system. Alone, One World Trade Center incorporates enough structural steel to construct 6 Eiffel Towers, use of the strongest concrete ever poured in New York City, elevators with a top speed of 2,000 feet per minute, the fastest in the Western Hemisphere, 22 acres of glass, over 1 million feet of conduit, and a structural spire taller than the Statue of Liberty. Is this innovation? To answer that question, we need to step back in history to understand how it all began. April 30th, 1939, the New York World's Fair opened on a former wasteland in Flushing Meadows, Corona Park, Queens. It was the 150th anniversary of the inauguration of George Washington. The fair covered 1,216 acres. It was 3.5 miles long. The theme? Building the world of tomorrow. With a look to the future, the fair was planned to be every man's fair. It included a combination of trade show, League of Nations, amusement park, food venues, and a pavilion located in the Government Zone Hall of Nations titled the World Trade Center, dedicated to world peace through trade. Following World War II, the United States was thriving economically and international trade was increasing. In New York City, economic growth was largely focused around Rockefeller Center in Midtown Manhattan, generally leaving the financial district around Wall Street to lose ground. However, there would be one exception in the development of One Chase World Plaza. It would be David Rockefeller, vice chair at Chase Manhattan Bank, who would announce that Chase would construct their new headquarters a block from Wall Street. The 60-story international-style skyscraper designed by Skidmore, Owings & Merrill would become the first significant commercial project to be developed in Lower Manhattan following the Depression and the first of its kind downtown. In addition to the tower, the project would include much-needed public space for Lower Manhattan. In 1958, David would assemble a coalition of businesses and real estate leaders called the Downtown Lower Manhattan Association. Still in existence today, they remain committed in maintaining a business community below Canal Street. From here, the proposal of a World Trade Center from a decade earlier would finally take root. In 1962, the project to be developed by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey would employ Minoru Yamasaki as the lead architect, along with Emery Roth & Sons, to begin planning for the World Trade Center. It would take 4 years for final building plans to be approved. The plans would call for a World Trade Center consisting of 15 million square feet distributed over 7 buildings. The 2 feature buildings would later become known as the Twin Towers, were planned to become the world's tallest buildings. The selected site would be the Lower West Side of Manhattan, formerly known as Radio Row, a warehouse district specializing in the sales of radio and electronic equipment would span a 13-block area and would close 5 through streets to form one of the first city superblocks. In March 1966, construction of the World Trade Center would begin. Site preparations were vast and included excavation of 1,200,000 cubic yards of material. The design and construction of the Twin Towers would employ numerous architectural, engineering, and construction innovations, such as structural tubes at the perimeter allowing for open floor plans, use of express and local elevators in conjunction with sky lobbies to maximize floor space, and use of prefabricated floor trusses and exterior wall components. In October 1970, the North Tower at the World Trade Center would exceed the height of the Empire State Building. April 2011, history would repeat itself. In December 1970, the North Tower is topped at 1,368 feet, with the South Tower following 7 months later at 1,362. December 1975, legendary top-of-the-world observation deck would open at the South Tower. It was estimated that the observation deck would receive 80,000 visitors a day. 6 months later, a 50,000 square foot restaurant called Windows of the World would top the North Tower. May 1987, developer Larry Silverstein opens the doors of 7 World Trade Center. In May 2006, once again, history would repeat itself. To address high vacancy rates at the World Trade Center, in September 1998, the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey announced that they would competitively bid a 99-year lease to a private entity for 1, 2, 4, and 5 World Trade Center and about 425,000 square feet of retail. Along with Vornado Realty Trust, 2 joint ventures between Boston Property and Brookfield Properties and Silverstein Properties and the Westfield Group would compete for the lease. Ultimately, it would be Silverstein Properties who would make a $3.2 billion bid and win the lease to the 10.4 million square feet of commercial property at the World Trade Center. In July 2001, the key would be turned over to developer Larry Silverstein of Silverstein Properties. Who would have imagined that a mere 2 months later, America would experience the largest attack on our country since Pearl Harbor? The morning of September 11th started for me like many days previous. Always an early riser, I was at my desk working at the office of Skidmore, Owings & Merrill on the 24th floor of 14 Wall Street, a short distance from the World Trade Center site, when American Airlines Flight 11 flew into the North Tower at 8:46 a.m. Immediately following the impact, I ran to the exterior windows and saw what looked like confetti, reminiscent of a Lower Manhattan ticker tape parade I had witnessed for the New York Yankees World Series win years earlier. Knowing we were at least a month away from the end of baseball season, I further observed and realized the shreds of paper were burning. Still, after all this time, I can recall in detail what I was wearing, the clear blue sky typical of a September New York City morning, what I was eating at my desk, working on, and where I was exactly as each of the events of the day unfolded. I was feet away from the exterior glazing when the second plane hit the South Tower. The impulse caused the windows to shudder back and forth. It felt as if time was happening in slow motion. As I ran back to my desk, my phone was ringing. It was my father calling, warning me that the media was already claiming that there was suspicion that these were acts of terrorism. Till that day, the word terrorism is a word I do not believe I had ever uttered. Moments following, senior partner of SOM, David Child's calm and comforting voice could be heard through the office advising of the uncertain situation. I grabbed my bag and with no hesitation and immediately ran to the elevator bank. I can recall being in the elevator on the way down with colleagues announcing we should have walked, and then advising to everyone to exit towards Pine Street in case the New York Stock Exchange directly across from the office was next to be targeted. The holes in the towers with fire radiating from them will forever be etched in my memory. Via foot, I was in Chinatown when the South Tower collapsed, and on 23rd Street when the North Tower collapsed shortly following. Huddled around a car with a radio blaring, I learned that American Airlines Flight 77 had crashed into the Pentagon. At 34th Street, prior to parting ways with a colleague, we exchanged phone numbers and hugged. I would have no way of knowing that it would be almost 10 years to the day when we would unexpectedly reunite. It was not until I reached 42nd Street, reading the news streaming across the electronic billboards of Times Square, that I learned American Airline Flight 93 had crashed in a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. I was alone, with no means of reaching my family, and the gravity of the situation was alarming. Like many, on the eve of 9/11, at approximately 5:20 p.m., I watched in horror the 7 World Trade Center tower collapse on national television. This would be the 3rd tower that day that would collapse in New York City. I read later that 7 World Trade Center was designed by Emery Roth & Son. It was clad in red masonry, situated above a Con Ed power substation, and was 47 stories tall. I recall after watching a tower collapse, full of emotion from a horrific day, that I had no recollection of ever seeing this building, even though I must have walked past it hundreds of times over the years. In November 2002, 13 months following the events of September 11th, a groundbreaking ceremony was held for 7 World Trade Center and the Con Ed substation. The redesigned substation, which was planned to convert high voltage power to low voltage for use in office buildings and residents, would not only replace what was lost on September 11th, but would be sized to accommodate the electric demands of the World Trade Center site to be rebuilt. The groundbreaking ceremony was attended by distinguished dignitaries: Larry Silverstein, members of Silverstein Properties, members of Con Ed, media, building professional, construction trade personnel, and myself. Larry Silverstein and his organization would do the unthinkable in a New York City market where the focus for real estate developers has long been gross floor area and floor area ratio. He would not only move ahead on a project without an anchor tenant, but would make the decision to reduce the overall footprint of the building with the goal of reopening access through Greenwich Street. This would allow for the restoration and connection to Tribeca through the World Trade Center site and south to Battery Park. A triangular park across from 7 World Trade Center, designed by landscape architect Ken Smith, would occupy the balance of the building's original footprint, located between the restored Greenwich Street and West Broadway. The park created public open space, allowed for enhanced lights and views for the building, and provided a visual connection to the 65-foot wide by 14-foot high glass lobby art wall featuring a moving text installation designed by artist Jenny Holzer. Innovative? I think so. In 2006, 7 World Trade Center would become the first building to be rebuilt at the original World Trade Center site following the events of 9/11. The project employed emphasis on building enhancements focused on life safety, including improved smoke exhaust, emergency communications, 30-inch cast-in-place concrete shear walls surrounding the stairs, stair pressurization, area of rescue assistance, 66-inch stair widths in lieu of 44 required by code, photoluminescent markings, and battery backup for exit stair lighting. In addition to life safety enhancements, the building would focus on promoting environmental design. To name a few: increased open space, stormwater collection for park irrigation, exterior wall maximizing interior daylighting for energy conservation and light, participation in a lead core and shell pilot program, and recycling of construction waste. 7 World Trade Center would become the first commercial office project in New York City to receive the USGBC LEED Gold status. In March 2006, at the opening ceremony, I joined colleagues in Silverstein Properties for a ceremonial toast in the lobby of the building. Professionally, this would become one of the greatest days of my career. The tower opened in the absence of any tenants, gradually drawing anchor tenant Moody's, an investment company, in 2007, reportedly repaying the highest prices ever paid in Lower Manhattan. In September 2011, 10 years following the attacks of 9/11, Silverstein Property would announce that the 52-story, 1.7 million square foot tower was finally 100% leased. 5 years following its opening, in preparation of SOM's 75th anniversary, I was interviewed. As the Lever House had been one of SOM's signature buildings since 1952, the question I was asked was, what project did I consider to be a modern-day legacy? Many were surprised that my response was not 1 World Trade Center. Instead, I responded with 7. 7 World Trade Center was constructed during a period of time when New York City was grieving at its deepest. Beyond the Twin Towers and 7 World Trade Center, numerous other buildings at the World Trade Center site and the surrounding areas were destroyed and badly damaged on 9/11, such as Fitterman Hall, the Verizon Building, St. Nicholas Greek Orthodox Church, Deutsche Bank, World Financial Center, Millennium Hilton, and countless small businesses that lost their inventory or lacked financial means to sustain their business following 9/11. Returning to Wall Street 1 week following the events of 9/11 was one of the saddest days of my life. The events of the day of 9/11 were unimaginable, and I was too scared and horrified that day to process an emotion of sadness. I spent the week following in utter denial that anyone had actually perished. I recall meeting one of the SOM partners in charge on the platform of the 72nd Street subway on my way to Lower Manhattan on the morning of September 17, 2001. It was the first day the office would reopen for business following the events of 9/11. When I arrived, I noticed my desk was covered in dust, my breakfast half eaten, and the drawing I had been working on still flashing on my computer screen. The haste in which I had left that morning was evident. There was a smell that I would describe like burning rubber that would last well into 6 months. Police with assault rifles and security presence everywhere. On March 11, 2002, the Municipal Art Society presented the Tribute of Light, an art installation of 88 7,000-watt xenon lights echoing the shape of the Twin Towers. The installation was located adjacent to the World Trade Center, marking the 6-month anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. The illumination reached a height of 4 miles and could be seen throughout New York City. It was on that evening that I retained enough courage to get close enough to the World Trade Center site to fully comprehend the hole in the New York City skyline. It would be years before I would describe a feeling of normalcy would return to Lower Manhattan. The rebuilding of 7 World Trade Center helped in bringing about a positive energy in the midst of despair. It created jobs and provided a means in which to move forward. I would often see Larry Silverstein himself, with his pants hemline rolled, walking around the site, shaking the hands with the construction workers who tirelessly worked in less than ideal conditions. Almost every hard hat adorned an American flag, and there was a feeling of pride in everyone involved that I have never seen or experienced before. I'm not certain I ever will again. Legacy. All the while this was happening, in December 2002, the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation, LMDC, commissioned 7 teams to present plans for the World Trade Center site. Foster and Partners, Meyer, Eisman, Gwathmey Hall, Peterson, Littenberg, Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, Studio Daniel Libeskind, Think Team, and United Architects. The entries were presented to the public at the Winter Garden on the World Financial Center. Innovator, Daniel Libeskind's proposal titled Memory Foundation would be selected. In addition to the National September 11th Memorial Museum to honor the victims of 9/11, the plan would include 4 office towers, one of which would have a towering spire to top an elevation of 1,776 feet, symbolic to the year of the Declaration of Independence. It would also include the World Trade Center Transportation Hub, 550,000 square feet of retail space, and a performing arts center. The proposal would restore New York City's skyline, and the Freedom Tower was set to someday be the tallest building in North America. To address security concerns raised by the New York City Police Department in regard to the proximity of the Freedom Tower to West Street, the building would later be relocated within the master plan to the northwest corner of the 16-acre World Trade Center site. In 2005, the final design for the Freedom Tower, which eventually would become known as the One World Trade Center building, would be unveiled by David Childs of Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. The design of the tower rises from an almost 200-foot cubic square, which is the same proportion of the existing Twin Towers. At the top of the cube, the square edges of the podium are transferred back, transforming the square into 8 tall isosceles triangles in elevation. At the top, the plan is a square rotated 45 degrees from the base. The tapering triangular forms are reminiscent of great New York City icons, such as the Chrysler and Empire State Building. In December 2006, I was selected by SOM to lead the technical team for the One World Trade Center project. In accepting the position, I gave my word that I would be there till the end. In June 2007, with a team of about 30 architects, SOM completed construction documents for the project. It was a feat. As the technical partner in charge at the time signed each of the 300-plus drawings, I stood and looked on at our accomplishment. June 28, 2007 would mark a major milestone in the rebuilding effort. We were on our way. Over the years, I was surprised every time I would hear someone ask, why is the project taking so long? The below-grade portion of the project is 500,000 square feet. To put this into perspective, that is roughly equivalent to a 13-story tower. The perimeter of One World Trade Center borders Port Authority Retail, Port Authority Fan Plant, Transportation Hub and Concourse, Memorial, and the Future Performing Arts Center. Following the events of 9/11, the existing World Trade Center bathtub slurry wall, which had initially been built to hold back the water of the Hudson River, was badly damaged. As part of the initial ground zero recovery efforts, the existing wall had to be temporarily stabilized by tiebacks. In addition, for long-term stability, the slurry wall was stabilized by adding a reinforced 30-inch thick concrete liner wall adjacent to the existing condition. Portions of the below-grade and major structural components of the tower had to be constructed over remnants of the existing basement slabs that remained following 9/11 and above the existing pat tracks. Needless to say, it was a complicated design and construction further complicated by limited access and work schedules that had to be coordinated with a track outage. To address security concerns, there was significant emphasis placed on the structure of the building. 30-inch thick concrete walls surround the base of the building to a height of 50 feet, protecting lobby occupants and the core. The flat slab below-grade construction ranges in thickness from 14 to 22 inches. Tower slabs are comprised of composite steel metal deck and concrete slabs, and a core utilizing 10,000 to 14,000 psi concrete, with wall thicknesses up to 4 feet. Special considerations for use of high-strength concrete were required, concerning weather, temperature, and thickness. A typical tower office floor and core consumed almost 1,500 cubic yards of concrete. In total, there would be 215,000 cubic yards of concrete used at One World Trade Center. In October 2008, the project celebrated a major milestone in reaching grade elevation. With a staggering 50-foot lobby and approximately 130 feet of mechanical space servicing the base of the building, the first office floor is located at an elevation of 186 feet above grade. On a typical office floor, columns are spaced 30 feet on center, with the perimeter steel utilizing high-strength, wide-flange members with sections up to W14 by 730. In total, 6 fabrication shops were used to fabricate the 46,000 tons and approximately 30,000 pieces of steel. In regard to construction, methods had to be accounted for in the design of the tower, such as the use of permanent erection steel within the core to allow for the advancement of steel and metal deck placement well in advance of the concrete core. Self-rising, reusable formwork to slip past a specially designed ring beam structure around the perimeter of the core, and construction hotels placed within the core to provide structural rigidity prior to concrete placement, as well as were used to house construction offices and the well-publicized Subway sandwich shop. These advancements allowed for approximately a 20-floor spread of construction taking place every day, with steel typically 6 floors above the rest, followed by metal deck, concrete shear walls and slabs, stairs, spray fireproofing, curtain wall, and carpentry. One World Trade Center would become the first office tower to rise at the World Trade Center Master Plan, with a memorial carved out of the earth speaking of the past and remembrance. One World Trade Center speaks about future and hope. Similar to 7 World Trade Center, the building incorporates advanced life safety systems that exceed requirements of New York City Building Code and have led the way in developing new standards for high-rise construction in New York. In addition to incorporating egress stair enhancements, the tower would incorporate the following emergency access components within the core: emergency responder elevator with a pressurized 2-hour rated vestibule, pressurized emergency responder stairwells, pressurized tower stairs, and dedicated emergency power. The width of the tower egress stair would be increased from code minimum 44 inches to 72 inch, allowing for two-way traffic. Similar to 7 World Trade Center, the egress stair would be surrounded by cast-in-place concrete and reach transfer points several stories above grade, allowing the tower stairs to split into 4, providing direct access to grade at any one of the 4 remote locations at the base of the building. On August 30th, 2012, the final piece of the tower steel was lifted into place. Several months later, the 420-foot spire, split into 18 sections for a total of 758 tons, would start the journey from Quebec, Canada, via barge to New York City. On May 3rd, 2013, the final piece of the spire, which houses an architectural beacon light, was lifted into place, raising the building to its symbolic height of 1,776 feet. The beacon light, a combined vision of SOM and lighting designer Claude Engel, would take a collaboration of engineers, theatrical rigging designers, light fabricators, electrical contractors, and steel erectors to develop. The beacon, which contains over 260 50-watt LED modules, will produce a combined 288,000 lumens of light. The LEDs will remain stationary, but will be reflected by rotating mirrors attached to a motorized turntable. Its expected visibility, up to 26 miles. In 2013, One World Trade Center was thrust back into the spotlight to heavily debate whether the 400-foot plus tall permanent structure, reaching a height to its architectural top of 1,776 feet, was an antenna or a spire. On November 12th, the Council on Tall Building and Urban Habitat Height Committee, consisting of 25 members of architects, engineers, contractors, academia, declared that One World Trade Center is the nation's tallest building. One World Trade Center would finally earn its bragging right. Currently, today, we are in the process of working towards obtaining a certificate of occupancy for the building, while numerous floors are abuzz with tenant contractors fitting out their spaces. The design process of One World Trade Center began in 2005. Anyone involved will tell you it has been a long journey. Every November in New York City, the marathon is a staple event for New Yorkers. For many years, I had looked on and cheered thousands of strangers battle through 26.2 miles and wondered whether or not I could ever do it. I was not a runner. In fact, when I decided to take on the challenge, I had never run more than a block and did not even own a pair of legitimate sneakers. In 2011, I completed my first marathon through 5 boroughs of New York. Crossing the Verrazano Bridge, I could not help but smile, seeing One World Trade Center already making its mark at that time on the New York City skyline. As I approached the last quarter of a mile, I spotted my family and friends. I wanted so badly to wave out and call to them, but I had only enough energy left to nod. It had been 18 weeks of strenuous training, and the last 5 miles were unbearable, but I never gave up. It was truly an amazing day. In September 2012, Esquire magazine ran an article titled "The Truth About the World Trade Center." Tishman Construction field super and my colleague, Michael Pinelli, was quoted as saying, "The job is a marathon." All I could think after reading this was, that pretty much sums it up. Many times throughout the past 12 and a half years, it would have been easy to throw in the towel. There have been countless setbacks and challenges, but each day I focused on my role in the job, which was to execute the project and to ensure that the design intent of David Childs was maintained. It has been an amazing and indescribable opportunity to have played a part in a process for something that has such symbolic meaning to not just New York City, but to the world. World Trade Center. Starting from its origin in 1939, symbolizing world trade through peace, has always been rich in innovation. It stems from great minds, such as David Rockefeller, politicians, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, developers such as Silverstein Properties, architects such as Minoru Yamasaki, Emery Roth & Son, Daniel Libeskind, Santiago Calatrava, Michael Arad, Fumiko Maki, Foster & Partner, Richard Rogers, David Childs, and Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. Contractors such as Tishman Construction, responsible for building the initial Twin Towers and 7 World Trade Center, as well as the current 7 World Trade Center, 1 World Trade Center, Towers 2, 3, and 4, and is involved in a joint venture on the Hub Concourse. Anchor tenants, such as Moody's and Condé Nast, who announced in May 2011 that they would make the move to 1 World Trade Center. And countless construction, trade, men, women, and design professionals. In the 1970s, the New York skyline was one of a kind. The Twin Tower structures were likely the most recognizable buildings in the world. Today, Lower Manhattan is a thriving community full of commercial and small businesses, residents, restaurants, galleries, and occupied open park space. The New York skyline has returned and once again has become a symbol of world trade through peace. I will conclude quoting a statement from Minoru Yamasaki on the World Trade Center. I feel this way about it. World trade means world peace, and consequently, the World Trade Center buildings in New York had a bigger purpose than just to provide room for tenants. The World Trade Center is a living symbol of man's dedication to world peace. Beyond the compelling need to make this a monument to world peace, the World Trade Center should become of its importance, become a representation of man's belief in humanity, his need for individual dignity, his belief in the cooperation of men, and through cooperation, his ability to find greatness. Thank you.
Don't go anywhere.
Okay.
So we have time for some questions.
Oh my.
Yes.
Hi. So my question is, how long did it take to clear the debris left by the original World Trade Center?
It was, I can't exactly remember the period in which the final ground zero debris was finally 100% cleared, but they worked in areas. For example, like 7 World Trade Center, the reason why we started working on that project 2 weeks following 9/11. Like our office was involved. But that building was actually, nobody perished in it, and that building did not have a basement. Oh, it had one, I believe it might have had one level of basement. So when everything basically collapsed, the cleaning debris was much easier, and being that nobody had perished there and it was not considered part of the recovery efforts, that building was actually able to start immediately. But it was several years. I mean, just the below ground, that's why I added that in about the reconstruction of the slurry wall. I think a lot of people did not realize how much work went into rebuilding that. I mean, the wall was extremely badly damaged, and part of when I was talking about World Trade Center, I noted that there were original slabs that were left in place that were part of the original World Trade Center site. And if you go down to the basement today, you can still see them in the new tower. But a lot of those were questionable periods where people were not certain whether or not to leave them in place, but taking them out actually would have been even more difficult at that time. And so we were dealing with a lot of existing conditions. So I think it really depended on where you were in the overall site, but it was several years before it was actually completed.
Yes, in the back.
Yeah, hi. I was just wondering if you experience any frustration yourself. Often the media portrayal of the whole ordeal, there was this impression that David Childs and Larry Silverstein in particular were kind of portrayed as villains, or portrayed as the heroic Daniel Rubinstein versus the corporate David Childs. And you can tell from your presentation you guys have a very positive view of David Childs. And I was just wondering if you maybe could share with us how you experience that kind of difference between what the media portrayal was and what your actual experience was.
I've been asked that question a lot, and I actually said it to somebody earlier today. I've been working down at World Trade Center site almost immediately following 9/11, and I think one of my success there is that I really remained focused to the building, and I did not get caught up into the political nature of what was happening there. I mean, there are countless stories, and I mentioned to somebody earlier that there's a good film that's out there that really, I think, kind of portrays it a little bit. But for myself, rebuilding and being down there and being part of that rebuilding process was extremely important. And every day I just went in with that, with that focus, and I really stayed out of it completely. But I think that's probably one of the reasons why I was able to stay there and work there for so many years.
Yes.
I'm just curious, approximately how big was the architecture team to do the construction documents for such a wonderful building?
We were probably about 45 people at its largest, at its peak. It was a lot. It was a big team, and we had an entire floor dedicated to just reworking of the World Trade Center. I mean, we were involved in the master planning. We had people actively working on 7 World Trade Center and Tower 1 simultaneously. So it was a large group of us working on that project.
Yes.
How did your firm get picked to design it?
7 World Trade Center or one?
What was the process like when they wanted to redesign the building?
Well, we were working in collaboration with Daniel Liebeskin's office, and so they were working with us at SOM. And I'm not, the actual specifics of that are a long, drawn-out question. But there was a major redesign of the project, and which is why I make the distinction between the Freedom Tower and One World Trade Center. As it's known today, it's One World Trade Center, and a lot of that came out of security concerns. The design, as it stands today, had to react to a series of security memorandums that were done by the FDNY, New York City Building Department, NYPD. And so the building as it is today reflects that.
You said that you were designated as the technical architect.
That's correct.
Could you describe for our students what that really means and how it was that you chose to be a technical architect?
Well, I am been at SOM since 1998, and I am a technical director of the technical department there. And the way that SOM is structured, there's basically 3 major teams within each of our projects. There's a design department, technical department, and project management. And my role on the project was less about being the designer, but more about being I was in charge of basically the fabrication, construction documents, and the day-to-day on the construction site from DD until completion.
And why did you decide to take that path rather than another path?
I chose that when I went to SOM. We basically, at that time when I started at SOM, there was 2 basically departments. It was either a design department or a technical department. And I chose to be part of the technical department there to broaden my expertise on technical design, and ended up really enjoying it. I had had a wonderful career there. I started out working on what was the original Bear Stearns project, now owned by JP Morgan, but I had the opportunity to come onto that project to start taking on the shop drawings, and I was sent out to the site, and I just found the passion for the construction side, building, working with contractors, working with fabricators, and really understanding the nuts and bolts of how things come together, working with glass fabricators, stainless steel, every component of a building.
Other questions? Yes.
So you likened the project to a marathon, and most marathons have a segment of the marathon that, it's notorious for being difficult. Here in Boston, we have Heartbreak Hill. Can you describe a moment of extreme difficulty and how you overcame it on this project? Overcame it.
It's funny because when I read that article, this gentleman that I mentioned, Michael Pinelli, longtime friend, he was a field super at 7 World Trade Centers. We've been working together for well over a decade. And when I read it, I had, not that long since finished my own marathon, and it really, to me, just summarized it. Just that it's kind of like a battle. I mean, it's I guess after you've kind of built a building, it takes a very long period of time, sometimes maybe 3 or 4 years. And on this project, I think it's such a rare experience. I mean, it has lasted a really, really long time. And just the fortitude to be able to get up every morning and just keep plugging ahead is probably one of the largest challenges. And not giving up and not, I think the gentleman asked about the politics, and not getting caught up in all these things that sort of had constant setbacks. We were constantly redesigning. You know, if you go back and look at earlier stages of this project, there was a mast, an enclosure on the top of our spire. The base of the building looks very different. I mean, we have gone through numerous revisions. I mean, I have drawn things 3 and 4 times. And, you know, you just have to keep going, know that it's for the better of the good, and just keep marching ahead.
Yes.
Since 9/11, one of the other disasters in New York has been the flooding a couple of years ago. And that has to be on the mind of people like Larry and your firm and other developers down there. How much have those considerations figured in changes here, and what do you see ahead for construction decisions in Manhattan in the years to come?
Oh, I mean, it's changed dramatically. I mean, I think most people did not realize, but World Trade Center site was damaged very, very badly during the floods of Sandy. In one World Trade Center alone, we had water came up, was our B4, B4M level, B3, and portions of our B2. So it was completely submerged in probably 20, 40, maybe over 40 feet of water. And people don't even realize that. I can only say that because I've been on Port Authority tours and they've said it publicly. But people didn't even realize that I actually, I have a home in New Jersey along the coastline, and I watched in horror as like what was going on in New Jersey. And for a split second, they showed a picture of the memorial, and all of a sudden it dawned on me what was happening at World Trade Center. And frantically, I was reaching out to some of my colleagues only to find this out hours later, that they were, you know, nobody could have predicted what could have happened down there. And you know, we have spent the last year and a half working on a resiliency plan. We had to basically, for the last year, have moved all of our infrastructure up above ground. And we're still working on that plan. It's an enormous site, and it's very, very, very difficult to control because it's completely out of your control of your building and your basement, where you can say, I'm going to quarantine off my building, and I know that I've done it, and you can check that box. But you have subways and paths and other entities that you don't always have control over. And so we have worked for the last year and a half in partnership with all that area, the entire World Trade Center site and its adjacencies and other developers outside of the site to make sure that you know, the precautions have been made, and that you know, I think that there's only so much in some cases that you can do, but you need to make sure that the life safety and the life services of the heart of the building are maintained. But it is, I mean, to answer your question, it's constantly on our mind in New York, and every new building that we design, it's a question that is out there very early on, and you know, all of our life safety functions are now moving up to higher elevations.
Don?
Would you talk about your education and how it prepared you to be what you describe as a technical architect, and in particular discuss what you learned in school that might have prepared you for the construction administration, the contract administration component of architectural service?
Well, I have a Bachelor of Architecture from Syracuse University, but I never set out in my career. I was a much stronger designer than I was ever in technical, and which is one of the reasons why SOM, I was very interested in working for them, because I wanted to expand my technical knowledge. But you know, my education was very well balanced, both between design and technical, and I never would have foreseen my future as a student ending up where I did. You know, I just, it was something that sort of happened to me. I landed up on a great job early on in my career, working on the construction site, and I realized that I was, you know, very passionate about being out there and being involved in the building process. And I've been very fortunate to have been involved in a number of projects in New York, and also now working on a lot of projects overseas, which I think my knowledge in the construction has really enabled me to kind of to be able to sort of take what I know and try to educate others in how to better enforce and I guess better instill greater design practices.
Have you ever encountered challenges as a woman overseeing the guys who generally work on these kinds of projects?
That's another good question. I do get asked that quite often, and I actually have to say I haven't, which is a good thing. Early on in my career, I was working on a project in UBS Warburg, and it was the world's largest trading floor in Connecticut. And back then, I can remember, I was probably in my very young 20s, and I would go out there, and I got a lot of grief from a lot of the contractors out there. And, what I learned to realize was that it wasn't about being a woman out there. It was about not having the background or having briefed myself on being able to answer the questions is what the issue was. And when I finally realized that, and I sort of woke up, I approached things very differently following that period. Every time I went out to the site, I made sure I knew what I was going out there to look at, and I made sure that I knew that I had the answer in my head before ever getting there. Some things you can't predict, but for the most part, I knew what I was getting myself into, and I knew how I was going to respond. And from that, you gain confidence, and I earned my respect in the construction industry. So today, I consider them my friends, but I think I've had a very positive experience working on the construction side. It's been great.
We conclude each Cassiary lecture by giving the lecturer a medal. And so I'm pleased to present you with this year's Cassiary Medal.
Oh, wonderful.
And,
thank you very much.
If you would put that on.
Thank you. Oh, it's beautiful. Oh, it's very lovely. Thank you very much, Coach. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.